We thought pee was stored in the balls, but it turns out it's just microplastics. And it's not just in our balls, it's in our blood, our organs, the oceans, the mountains, our air, our food, our clothing, even our medicine. Plastics and endocrine disrupting chemicals, which are made from petroleum and petrochemical plants, are everywhere, penetrating every aspect of our lives.
Surrounds us, penetrates us.
But I don't want to be all doom and gloom here, so we have to ask, if plastic and microplastics are omnipresent, how do we actually avoid them? From the underwear that we put on first thing in the morning, to the meal prep containers we use for lunch, to our mattresses and pillows at night, our lives are inundated with plastics. How can we live free of it, detoxify our systems, and protect future generations when they're everywhere? Some people might think this sounds like fear-mongering, but this isn't like the lead and asbestos of past generations. It is so much worse. These chemicals, these forever chemicals, are seemingly here to stay. They may impact generations to come. They may even prevent future generations from coming. The chemicals used to make plastic hard might make it impossible for future men to get hard.
Stay hard.
No, but this is serious. These microplastic particles are wreaking havoc on male fertility, causing irreversible damage and plummeting sperm counts. The science is clear. Our world is being overtaken by plastic, causing severe reproductive harm and is linked to nearly any disease that you can imagine. And according to some experts, is possibly even contributing to certain health issues like gender dysphoria. This isn't just an environmental crisis. It is a personal and global health emergency that could span generations if we don't start altering course now. And if we don't, I think the consequences could be worse than anything we could imagine. So that is what we're getting into today, gang. Microplastics and forever chemicals, the 5 major ways that they're getting into our bodies, what they're doing, and hopefully what we can do about it. If this is your first time here, my name's Andrew. I do deep dives on various topics as they relate to optimizing your health and physique through holistic and natural means. So with all that out of the way, guys, let's get into it, starting first with what this study actually says. This study's been all over the place, so if you've already seen it interpreted and just want to get to the rest of the video, you can click this timestamp or the timestamp in the description. This study took 23 human testes and 47 from pet dogs. Pet dogs, I just want to clarify that because that's going to matter. Also, it's weird that they used an odd number. As the video would imply, they found microplastics in 100% of the samples.
Hold up, wait a minute. Wow. Ooh.
The human sperm counts couldn't be counted because, you know, they're all from dead bodies. But the dog sperm counts were found to be lower in samples that had higher levels of PVC in them. PVC is the plastic that's used in some pipes. Obviously, packaging, flooring, tons of medical things. You should probably remember that I just said in a lot of medical things, by the way. It's used in loads of building materials and clothing. PVC use is so common because it's thought to show very little deterioration when it's not plasticized. But unfortunately, I have 47 sets of dog nuts that say that might not be true. I don't personally have them, just to be clear. Also, that word plasticized, that doesn't mean not plastic. This list is almost endless though. Isn't learning about plastic fun and not terrifying at all how diverse its uses are, guys? So diverse, in fact, that we found 12 different kinds of plastic in our testicles. And we found almost 3 times as much microplastics in human testicles than dogs. Probably because our dogs are lucky enough to be indoors most of the time. They're not handling all these things. We're not wrapping up their testicles in plastic clothing. Broadly though, how is it that microplastics and these EDCs are actually getting into us? Whether you're eating them, inhaling them, or absorbing them directly into your skin, the fact remains. Microplastics pose a significant health risk due to their ability to not just penetrate the body in various different ways, but in their own unique and equally disastrous ways. As I and many other experts will say through this video, they are so ubiquitous, they're nearly unavoidable. How much plastic do you think we're putting into our environment? How much more do you think we're putting out every single year? I'll let urologist Rena Malik, MD, explain.
1 metric ton, 1 ton of plastic waste produces up to 100,000 microplastic particles after it's been incinerated. And over the last 70 years, we've gone from 1.7 million tons of waste in the 1950s to 348 million tons in 2017.
To make that number as terrifying as possible, in 2023, we produced about 430 million tons of plastic globally, which leads to a number of particulates that was honestly too complicated for me to figure out. I'm not that great at math. 4.3e plus 13, which the internet says is 43 trillion microplastic particulates in 1 year. So how are we getting this plastic inside of us? According to Dr. Shanna Swan, who you'll be hearing a lot from in this video, she is one of the world's top experts on this. The majority of our intake comes from ingestion.
The phthalates are probably mostly coming from our food. Let's think of a little experiment. So go into a hospital, into the neonatal intensive care nursery. I'll come back to the food.
Okay.
And there's a baby lying there, and that baby has a lot of lines coming into her body. So as the food nutrients comes through the tubes, goes into the baby metabolizes them, goes into the urine because they're water soluble, and then we get the urine, we measure, and we can see what's in it. And the amount of phthalate that's in that urine is exactly proportional to the number of lines coming into the baby. So that, if you understand that, you understand how food could be contaminated with phthalates, because milking machines have this, and you know, all kinds of processing machines have this soft plastic.
So we're seeing phthalates in our urine, but we're also seeing plastic in human feces. Want to guess what kind it is? It's polyethylene. Oftentimes we get these plastics and EDCs from similar sources.
So this stuff is coming into the food somewhere between the time it's picked, and by the way, phthalates could be in pesticides as well. I'll tell you why in a minute. And then they're introduced not only through those tubes, but also through the packaging. They're wrapped in soft plastic sometimes. And then in our homes, we might cook in microwave in plastic, for example. All of that doesn't stick to the plastic. It's not chemically bound. Hops into the food, gets into us, gets into a pregnant woman's womb, affects the offspring.
See, it's the stuff that's used in that coating that makes paper wrappers grease resistant. Think of those McDonald's wrappers. But it's also drink bottles, condiment bottles, milk jugs, shrink wrap, blister packs for your medication, yogurt and cream cheese containers, bread bags. But do microplastics in our gut really even matter? Well, according to Gloria Fackelman, quote, the more microplastics found in our gut, the fewer commensal bacteria could be detected. Commensal bacteria supply their host with essential nutrients and help defend the host against opportunistic pathogens. Disturbances can impair many health-related processes and may lead to diseases in the host. There are even some other experts out there that think plastics might be behind leaky gut and different autoimmune disorders. But consumption through foods, it's not just the obvious things that I've already mentioned. It doesn't take a genius to think that microwaving a little plastic tub in a TV dinner or some cheap meal prep container, probably a no-go, right? Yet it's even in the whole food that we're eating with little to no processing. I covered bioaccumulation in my episode on lab-grown meat, episode 57, which I know you'll love, but the simplest way to think about it is you eat whatever you eat eats. We found microplastics in human tissues, hearts, testicles, muscles, blood, so it stands to reason that it could get into the animals that we're eating. And oh wait, we have already found microplastics in seafood. And now, thanks to a TikToker who goes by GMF Music,
All that. This is waste from different businesses, bakeries, cookie places, all types of stuff.
we're seeing cattle being fed plastic directly. That video got him fired, by the way. So you'd think that he had exposed some kind of criminal activity based on their response to it, right? Right? The FDA calls this garbage feeding. It is meant to be food waste from schools, restaurants, and food processing plants, but apparently asking them to get all that plastic out is just a little too much because there's a predetermined amount of plastic that is allowed in these animal feeds for certain countries. It's even legal in 27 states and 2 US territories. I don't know why this is, but the majority of the countries that are allowing this are liberal-leaning states. My home state of Nevada and my current home of Colorado both allow garbage feeding, even though they like to project this image of natural and wild and beautiful and all these different things. You're feeding animals literal garbage. What the fuck? I had to get to the bottom of this. So I reached out to Eric Perner, a second-generation regenerative agriculture farmer and the owner of Rep Provisions. All I could think was, there's no way this is normal for commercial farms, right?
How we grow animals, and I could just focus on beef, is in the typical conventional system is they will be raised on a ranch, on grass for the first year of their life, right? And then typically those calves are then auctioned off at some auction yard, livestock yard. And then those are then trucked to a concentrated animal feeding operation. And then they'll spend the next, probably 120 plus days fed a mix of different, high starch foods, grains, lots of corn, soybean, and, and then kind of fed this really unnatural diet, which probably has a lot of plastics in it. So they just find their way in somehow. And a lot of stuff they can grind up and use as a food source that may have had plastic in it. And it's the same with pork and chicken. And so all these feeds, like, we don't necessarily know how they're all produced. And my understanding is that some of the garbage that we use can be reprocessed for feed for different animals. And perhaps plastic works its way in that system because that's how we package food, spent food. And so, but I mean, that's part of this system we've developed. And I mean, I really believe it's been a detriment to human health.
Now, look, I was skeptical about plants being able to absorb plastic. I don't have a reason for that. It was kind of just intuition, and it is rare, or so we thought. Turns out what we were looking for in plants were not microplastics, but nanoplastics, even smaller. A 2021 review on tons of literature of this subject from 2016 to 2021 found some pretty worrying data. Not only did they find nanoplastics are capable of entering cell walls in a 2021 study, they found many other methods of plastic absorption in plants. We're seeing plastic mulching become more common every single year due to the increased crop yield that it allows, which has made many people look past those potential worries for the future in favor of the surplus that they're yielding in the present.
That's a problem for future, Homer.
But what we do know is that as the plastic mulch degrades, it becomes nearly impossible to remove it from the soil, effectively leading to a permanent contamination of it. By pure coincidence, I had seen someone purchasing hundreds of pounds of plastic mulch just the day before my conversation with Eric, and I had to ask him about it.
Mulching can be a good thing for sure, because you want to keep that soil covered, but you want that also to feed the soil as well. And so that's how you get these deep roots. That's how you get plants, that can survive droughts. And that's what nourishes that soil, that microbiology. And that mulch feeds that microbiology. So if you're putting plastic on it, you're not feeding that microbiology in the soil that can grow healthier plants. You're doing nothing really. You may be leaching plastics into that. So another source where we could, leach plastics into that. But I would say, that's why Regen Ag, in my opinion, is really, we're trying to keep a living root growing for as long as possible, right? That's the whole kind of goal. And that's what nourishes soil health. That's what creates a great water cycle. That's what creates that microbiology that then releases those nutrients in that soil to those plants, which then the animals eat, and then they're the net benefit of that.
But how common is the use of plastic mulch? Let's remove all personal gardens. Let's even remove all countries except for one. In 2011, China was using plastic mulch on 20 million hectares of land. Once again, to give you guys a little freedom unit conversion that we can understand, that's about 70,000 square miles. That is larger than the state of Oklahoma where REP provisions is based, and it's expected to continue growing by 7% every year. I don't want to end up down too many rabbit holes because this video will end up being 3 hours long and it's already going to be really long. But for those who are watching this video on YouTube, here's a little chart for how different plastics are impacting the soil and crops that are grown in them. The unfortunate reality for many commercial farms is that this is just how they have always done it, and making that switch is either financially not possible for them because of the cost of changing their entire business, or the loss of money to their business would end up bankrupting them.
I mean, I can't compete with the efficiencies in the conventional ag world. It's amazing, like how quickly they can get weight, and they can do it way cheaper. Maybe 2/3 cheaper than what I can do it. But if you really take a step back and factor in all the costs, like, is it really cheaper? Is what I would ask. I mean, what are the consequences of all this from a human health perspective and what we spend on healthcare, which is $1 trillion a year? From a land health perspective, what are we costing ourselves? It may be dramatically more expensive
Eric is clearly someone who takes this very seriously, so I wanted to let him close this section out because his passion and pride around this it's just infectious.
You got to understand, like, I see it every day. And I have a lot of conventional ranches, that are in the same county. You can feel, see, hear the difference when you step on our property. And when you step on these other properties, and I'm not trying to be critical of folks, but they're just locked in this conventional system. It's absolute death. But when I step on our ranch and you can hear it, you can hear the sounds are different. You can see it in the amount of animals that exist here. You feel different. And I often wonder, like, is this part of, I don't know if you've kind of heard, but a lot of farmer and rancher and suicides are fairly common. And why is that? They get locked in this system, this economic system of just pure death all the time. And man, regen ag is completely different. It's completely different. It is, like I said, it's a life accelerator. And that's what I love most about it. That's what brings me joy anyway.
Make sure to check out repprovisions.com to see more of what Eric and his company do. Food isn't the only way though. A massive source of microplastics is in our drinking water. And yes, most people know about plastic getting into our water from water bottles, but what most people don't know is that we're getting a lot of it through tap water. But how much plastic do you think you're actually getting from one bottle? According to the NIH, each liter of water from a water bottle contains up to 240,000 tiny little pieces of plastic. About 90% of these fragments were nanoplastic. That number is much higher than previously thought too. The problem was that in those earlier studies, some of the plastic particles were too small for us to see, or at least we weren't looking for them. There might even be smaller ones now that we're unaware of. But as with many things, culturally, this became known through one of the unlikeliest of sources, Kim Kardashian, from a tweet in 2009. Now, although she was technically wrong, saying that these bottles were releasing dioxin into the water, I remember people in my school all misquoting that and saying, oh, it melts plastic into your water. Great job, Kim K. Task failed successfully.
You go, Glen Coco.
Tap water, of course, has its own issues depending on what your goals are. But one of the wildest things about it is that tap water is too contaminated for us to even use for research about microplastics, as Heather Leslie covers here.
And we knew when we started about 10 years ago or more now, time flies, to study microplastics that we couldn't use, for example, tap water when we were working with our samples, because we knew that tap water would contaminate our samples.
Yes, it's probably better than plastic bottles and probably better than unfiltered lake water. After all, we have found that bottled water, specifically plastic bottles, have over 200 times as much plastic as tap water does. But even the holy grail of water, spring water, is not on this perfection pedestal that people like to place it on. Think about it. Is it really that good if they just immediately bottle it into plastic? Like, what the hell are companies like Fiji thinking slapping that godly earth squirt into plastic? That is like serving fine wine in a little styrofoam cup or proposing with a ring that's in a cardboard box. That said, I do opt for spring water personally. Mountain Valley is the goat of commercially available water, in my opinion. But there might be an even better option. If you're able to get it from a higher elevation, you have better odds of much higher quality and purity with spring water, especially if you're going to bottle it yourself in a glass jug. I'll give you a full rundown at the end of this video for what I personally do, because there are some really great ways that you can bottle it yourself super easily. Personally, I think this next section is where things start getting a bit more ominous. Almost unbelievable if it were not for a lot of the sources confirming these worries. I'll bet one of the first things that you do in the morning is put underwear on. If you're a gym person, maybe some moisture-wicking, breathable joggers or leggings. You toss your makeup on if you're a lady, or if you're a guy and it's a Friday night and you're just out looking to party. And don't even get me started on breast augmentation, though we usually refer to those as macroplastics. I mean, have you seen the size of some of these things on Instagram, guys? That was a joke, guys. They're not plastic. I just really wanted to make that joke. I really wanted to say macroplastics. What you don't realize is that you just wrapped up your junk in plastic and then smeared more plastic and phthalates onto your face. Tons of these exfoliants and glitters are pure plastic. I probably don't need to explain that the tubs and bottles for makeup and lotions are all plastic, but let's assume you were aware of that and you switched to those cosmetics that are in metal tins. Even those, just like all canned foods, are lined, coated, or sealed with plastic, unfortunately. And all of those plastic petroleum-based products get absorbed through your skin anyway, like Dr. Anthony J covers here.
Plastics everywhere. Again, with the blankets, They sneak them into perfumes. Be careful with your perfume ingredients, your fragrances, your deodorant that smells really nice, your body wash that smells really nice. These things love to go through your skin. They act like hormones. It's like putting hormone cream on your skin.
Like, think about it. If you put something on your skin and then it's not there anymore, it didn't all just evaporate, right? It has to go somewhere. Clothing is a really interesting one, though, because I was deeply in denial of this. The way that I was originally exposed to this was being trained by Paul Chek in the Chek Institute. And he kept on saying, oh, you need to wear clothing of natural fibers, wool, cotton, hemp. I thought he was being dramatic, so I ignored it. So I have to say this out loud. I was wrong, and it wouldn't be the first time. More recently, though, I started getting ads for a 100% organic cotton underwear company, and they were citing these 2 studies about polyester being on your balls, causing azoospermia. Essentially, that means that it tanked the sperm counts of the men and animals in the study. I really want to be a dad, and that freaked me out. So I immediately bought new underwear, and they were super comfortable, so I was happy with it. Of course, I am a deeply skeptical person, so I looked deeper into those studies a few months after wearing the underwear and being perfectly happy with them. Upon checking them again, I felt they weren't as convincing as implied, and then I got pissed, and I ended up arguing with the company on Twitter, and this is the second time that I was wrong. See, these studies were just the tip of the iceberg. It wasn't just the polyester that was the issue. It was all of what I have mentioned and will mention through the rest of this video, and the so-called clothing was just a small piece of that awful plastic pie. Another YouTuber by the name of Aya explains more about how we turn petroleum into the synthetic plastic that so many of us unfortunately call clothes.
At this point, polyester can be mixed with other fibers like cotton, wool, and viscose. First, the polyester fibers are carded and combed into slivers. These slivers are pooled and pooled into thinner slivers and finally spun into cones of yarn. The second step is turning the polyester yarn into fabric. For shirts, the yarn is knitted in circular machines. Once done knitting, these raw polyester fabrics are washed, dyed with petroleum-based dyes, and treated with petrochemical finishings to be made into clothes.
Do you realize how wild that is? Using petroleum to make the fibers, then washing it with more petrochemicals, then dyeing it and finishing it with still more petrochemicals.
I use the stones to destroy the stones.
A company called Momivation, a consumer watchdog organization that tests eco-friendly wellness products for moms, ended up testing 32 different brands of activewear like Athleta, LuLaRoe, and Lululemon for forever chemicals like PFAs, a petrochemical, through a third-party EPA-certified lab. I don't say this to specifically target these companies. Some of them actually changed their manufacturing process after this. I say this because this is the rule, not the exception. Most companies will only make these changes as a business decision once the pressure gets high enough. This is how so much of our clothing is made, unless it is a principle that a company stands firmly on. PFAs are everywhere, and that only changes when we as consumers make a point to only buy clothing that are made of natural fibers, so they'll stop breaking down when we're wearing them, stop breaking down when we're getting them cleaned up in the wash. I mean, the exposure from PFAs through clothing, when compared to food and water, is much lower. But remember, clothing is a decision that you make one time, and then you permanently decrease your daily exposure. See, here's the third time I was wrong. I was thinking the problem was just the synthetic fiber itself being absorbed directly through our skin. Currently, it seems that's not the case, though that doesn't give me a ton of confidence. We've already been told that these PFAs and microplastics weren't a problem for decades, when the reality was that we just couldn't see or measure the issue.
SAPEA stated in their verdict, which is the word they use on their website, that there's no widespread risk to humans and the environment.
No widespread risk to humans and the environment.
And as Dick said, the WHO wrote that humans have ingested microplastics and other particles in the environment for decades, with no related indication of adverse health effects.
Remember, we used to not be able to tell that plants could absorb plastics into their cells either, but here we are. It's the progressive breakdown from wearing them and washing them. You inhale those nearly invisible fibers and they get into our food and water. They end up in our environment or landfills once you're done with them, and then as they degrade there, they slowly go into our groundwater and soil. And from that, it makes its way into rainwater through what are called airborne microplastics. They're literally everywhere.
Everywhere.
To put it into perspective, The average American throws away over 80 pounds of clothing per year. That is enough clothing to completely cover the state of Rhode Island under several layers every single year. We already have hundreds of studies, if not thousands, linking PFAs found in synthetic clothing to fertility issues in men and women, as well as different kinds of cancer, including testicular cancer. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take off every piece of clothing that I'm wearing right now that isn't 100% certified organic and natural fiber. I still have underwear on and a shirt, and they're actually both made by the same company, Nads, the company that I bought underwear from almost a year ago, who after 3 years has become the first ever sponsor of the Holistic Motion podcast. I am all about finding healthy choices that you only need to make one time and that you can repeatedly gain the benefit of that choice. 100% organic cotton underwear might actually be the easiest choice that you can make, because putting clothes on is probably something you're going to do every single day. It might even be one of the first things that you do every single morning and one of the last things that you take off at night. Unlike so many more of the choices that we will need to make to decrease our plastic and forever chemical exposure, you make this choice once. You reap that reward every single day. I was already on board with making this switch, but that isn't what set it in stone for me. See, I get pretty bad eczema on my hips. I actually have scars from it. I didn't even notice it, but after switching, my eczema went away. And then on laundry day, I put on an old polyester pair and it came back immediately. I looked it up and sure enough, polyester is linked to eczema. I immediately switched back to my Nads and it was gone the next day. So if you want to take your balls out of their plastic PFA prison pouches and then house them in a nice, cozy cotton cottage like I did, you should go to nadsunder.com and use the code HOLISTICMOTION for a ball-caressingly smooth 15% off your first order. Once again, I want to give a huge thank you to Nads for being the first ever sponsor of the Holistic Motion podcast. Now let's get back to the video. So yes, ingesting and wearing microplastics is a very real threat because you can't just stop eating and drinking water, and most people are fully reliant upon the modern conveniences of grocery stores and tap water. When it comes to clothing, most people usually only buy a couple sets and wear them out before they ever buy more. I can't blame them. And when it comes to cosmetics, most people will find one brand that they like and stick with it forever. But is there anything else that we can't stop doing? Maybe something the average person can't stop doing for more than 60 seconds or so? I don't know. Oh, wait! It's breathing. Yes, you thought the food and water were bad? Wait until you hear how terrible and unavoidable inhalation of microplastics are. The research on plastic inhalation is complicated for the same reason testing water is. All of our air is contaminated, as Heather Leslie says here.
We also knew about air contamination studies. There aren't that many dedicated to finding microplastics in the air, but we do know that the dust that we normally measure contaminants in our lab, that contains a lot of plastic.
It is found indoors. It is found outdoors. Microplastics are in your cushy corner office job with your cute secretary, Allie, who always smiles when you walk in, and your wife hates her for some reason. I mean, come on. She's just being a friendly coworker, Janice. They're also in that entry-level warehouse job that you're only going to keep for 1 year just to make some extra cash, but now you're noticing it pays so much better than every single gig that you can get with no formal education. It's really hard to leave now. But the weirdest part is that there is one kind of human who inhales significantly more plastic for some reason. So why is that? And who are they? Like I said, we're finding microplastics in the air in cities. We're finding it in houses. And we are finding distinct kinds of plastic and distinct concentrations of different plastics that are associated with their locale. For example, the air outdoors was found to have more of the plastic that is used in making tires, and indoors, they'd find more of the plastic from clothing that is made of synthetic fibers. I remember listening to Ben Greenfield back in like 2016 or so, and he was talking about brake dust inhalation, but I wasn't worried about it because I used to live out in the middle of nowhere in the boonies. Secretly, I wanted to be living in the city. Now I'm living in the city and I see how bad city air is, and I kind of wish I was back in the boonies again. But oddly enough, they were also finding bisphenol A, aka BPA indoors. Guys, can you believe that we are this far into the video and I have barely mentioned BPA? This video is bordering on plastic nihilism, and we still haven't talked about how fucking bad BPA is. But oh, trust me, we're going to. In 2019, a study found that children inhale as much as 5 times as much plastic as adults. But it's not totally clear why. My theory was going to be that kids are outdoors more, so they breathe in more, but that's not necessarily the case. Tons of kids are stuck inside like little iPad kids. For perspective though, the kids that they were testing had a similar amount of plastic inhaled as construction workers. I nearly didn't include this study because it was done in Asaluya, Iran, where they have tons of petrochemical plants. This study is clearly an outlier. I thought that was until I got through researching fertility and the cities that these petrochemical plants are in. And guess where we're going next, guys? You thought this video was terrifying already? You have no fucking idea how bad this is going to get. Let's run through that list again, guys. We are eating plastic and endocrine disrupting chemicals directly through it being stored in the cells of our food. We are drinking it. We are inhaling it. We are absorbing it through our skin from cosmetics, but we haven't really covered the topic that terrified me enough to research this. Needless to say, plastic in your balls isn't great. But what is it that it's actually doing? One of the first things researchers started noticing was that male gooches, aka anogenital distances, aka AGDs, were shrinking in mammals. First rats, as Shanna Swan covers here.
So here's this little pup that's born, and if he's unexposed, he'll have a good, standard penile size and AGD, and he won't have any malformations of his penis and so on. He'll be normal. But if his mother was exposed to phthalates, everything can go south. And what happens is the penis is smaller, and the AGD is smaller, and the scrotum is smaller, and the testes are maybe not descended. In other words, it didn't finish the process. It was arrested, if you will. So we say that pup is incompletely masculinized.
Now, I know this whole gooch measuring thing has gotten memed on pretty hard. It is kind of funny.
There is so much plastic inside of us, it's actually mutating our DNA. There's babies being born today with smaller testicles. Yeah. You want to hear something more fucked up? There's just guys going around measuring baby testicles, and nobody's doing anything about it.
So I did what any man with a camera would do in this situation. I decided to measure my gooch for you guys. Good thing I already took my pants off. Not on camera, as heartbreaking as that is for many of you, I'm sure. First, let's get an idea of what is considered normal based on the research.
And so I got all these people asking me, what should it be? What's good enough? What's big enough? 2 inches is the median. Here's the kicker. If it was less than 2, we're 7 times more likely to have a sperm count in the subfertile range as men who had an AGD longer than 2 inches.
Wow.
7 times. It certainly is related to sperm count.
44 millimeters, or about 2 inches, is the minimum that is correlated with a high sperm count. I don't want to give you guys an exact measurement, but I have one of the most stellar gooches in the world. That 44 millimeter goal, that is, oh my God. I am basically setting world records. I have got enough gooch to keep this entire planet populated, if that is the bar. But what does fertile even mean, and how much has it changed over the years? Obviously, we have different measurements for sperm quality and quantity. I'm not gonna bore you with that. Instead, there's something that matters much more here. According to this source, 50 years ago, when our plastic use really started ramping up, men were averaging about 350 million sperm per load. This graph is quite a bit higher than what most sources will say, so let's call that the upper end. But even if we are generous and say the average was lower, let's say a third of that, we still have to face this massive drop. There's an obvious inverse relationship here. Plastic goes up, sperm counts go down. But this graph stops at 2010, and you will not believe how bad it has gotten. Average as low as 40 million sperm, but it gets so much worse. Because it is not just about the sperm count. It's the morphology, the motility. For any of you lads out there that are sharing your baby gravy with any ladies, or men, you have a shitty product, is what I would say if we didn't change the standard to now call that number average. Seriously, we have got enough plastic in our balls that we could probably start giving birth to G.I. Joe action figures. A 40 million sperm count 50 years ago, that was basically the throw your dick in the trash point, because what were you even gonna do with that? But instead of looking at that number and panicking, we've instead decided to call that number average, men become less fertile, and instead of trying to find the root cause for it, we went LOL, whoops, and then changed the acceptable number. That is like having a class where everybody is getting B's, and instead of wondering why nobody is excelling, now we call those B's A's, we call those F's D's. This isn't fixing the problem. This is just allowing us to be more delusional in our denial. And guys, this information, it's not new. Dr. Shanna Swan was raising the alarm about this nearly 2 decades ago in a documentary called The Disappearing Male. This is actually the very first piece of content that I ever saw back in like 2012 or so, and it completely red-pilled me against plastic. That's actually where some of these video clips come from.
I've been here 12 years, and when I first started, of the 10 donors we would screen, we would accept maybe 7 or 8. They had really good counts, really good motility. Over time, it got harder and harder to recruit donors because we noticed of that same college-age population that of 10 people who would try out for our program, maybe 3 or 4 would have the sperm parameters that we need.
So let's think about that. What would happen if we started looking at people who came in for a fertility check and barely 30% of them were still considered fertile? Maybe we would change things. In the past, we did. Maybe scientists just aren't convinced of this data because so much of it is animal research. But again, it is shockingly hard to test humans because, well, we're all full of plastic already. There are no pure human samples to test, even when we're testing babies in the womb.
I just want to be pure.
So how can we be sure? I'm glad you asked. This is done with something called allometric scaling if you want to learn more about how we extrapolate animal data onto humans. Here you can see 9 different studies, all on rodents, as well as the human equivalent dose, or the HED, and their effect on sperm motility, sperm density, sperm malformation, aka sperm DNA damage, the destruction of the blood testosterone barrier, spermatogenic cell apoptosis, that's something that ensures only healthy sperm stays in our system, changes in sex hormone levels, and the effect on offspring. I am going to repeat that again, everybody. The effect on offspring. That will be on the test, you guys. Don't forget that I said that. You think it's going bad for adults? It is infinitely worse for babies and oftentimes permanent.
But the most vulnerable of all have not even been born.
There is no question that the most serious effects are to the unborn child because the effects are permanent and because the fetus has very few defenses against these chemicals.
Then we have this study from 2020 hypothesizing certain outcomes on human equivalent exposure, which showed a dose-dependent response in rats, where more microplastic exposure meant more dysfunction in terms of DNA damage, sperm quality, testosterone, LH, and FSH, but that isn't the scariest part. What would a human equivalent dose look like? If these rats were exposed to 100 micrograms per kilogram of body weight daily, then we consider the average human weight of 70 kilograms, or about 155 pounds in freedom units, we see that a comparable human exposure would be approximately 7,000 micrograms or 7 milligrams of plastic per day. Now, this number does still seem to be up for debate, but some research estimates that humans are currently ingesting somewhere between 1 to 5 milligrams of microplastic daily through food, water, and air. To extrapolate these animal studies onto humans is not even slightly outside of the realm of possibilities, but just in case there's still any doubt about how clear these animal to human extrapolations are, let's hear from Dr. Shanna Swan one more time.
Rather than looking at kids with problems, what I did was I just took a whole population of pregnant women and I got their urine, measured their phthalates, got their kids, measured their kids. So then I had the problem of what to measure in the kids because nobody had made this translation from an animal genital developmental system to a human. But we did that. And we developed this system for this exam for measuring all these things that you measure in a rat. We measured it in our children. And then we showed that the mother's phthalates did alter the genitals of the boys. So that was the first evidence. That was 2005. And then we published some more in 2008.
So let's rapid fire some animal data. 3 different studies, all showing a negative correlation between fertility with polystyrene intake and exposure. Also, phthalate esters seem to cause a more significant problem than other microplastics and EDCs for some reason. How is it that it's doing this? Largely because it is damaging the DNA in sperm. This is called the DNA fragmentation index, or DFI.
They got you by the balls.
So here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different studies all showing DFI being one of the strongest factors for predicting male infertility, as inability to conceive or increased levels of miscarriage due to the lower quality sperm. And what is the main cause of DFI? Exposure to toxic substances like plastics. Don't get me wrong, there's tons of other plastics out there that I'm sure are doing similar things, but ladies, you guys aren't safe either. 2 different studies from 2021 showing a decrease in ovarian reserve, i.e. how many eggs you've got left, increased ovarian fibrosis, decreased ovarian capacity, decreased ovary size. Why? Because in another study that they ran on oysters where they weren't seeing the endocrine disruption from microplastics, instead what they were seeing is that the energy that would otherwise be put toward reproductive health was instead focused on coping with the environmental stressor that is microplastics and causing issues with fertility. Think of it like how when you get sick, your body feels incapable of doing anything because its only focus is getting you healthy again. How likely is the body to want to reproduce if it thinks you are sick and dying? This is actually one of the theories on why infertility is so common in obese individuals. And yet again, we see this being true in male and female humans, as Dr. Shanna Swan covered on Modern Wisdom.
Men with low sperm count, men and women who are infertile, have a shorter lifespan. Now it's been shown enough times, in Denmark, by Mike Eisenberg in Stanford. I think there's probably a half a dozen papers on this. And it's really a lot. And I mean, first of all, men and women who have impaired, I would say, hormone systems are more likely to have other medical problems. For example, heart disease is increased. Diabetes is increased. Reproductive cancers are increased. What this adds up to is you die earlier.
It is very unlikely that the lack of fertility is the cause of early death, and much more likely that it's just the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, that you are very unhealthy and that your body needs to prioritize preserving your life instead of creating another. And this part is going to sound like a meme, but yet another study in 2021 found that while FSH, LH, and testosterone went down in male rats, they went up in female rats. Our sex hormones are being changed.
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
But we change things when it gets bad enough, remember? We do, I swear, guys. When the insecticide DDT started having adverse effects on the environment, wildlife, and causing human reproductive abnormalities, wow, that sounds familiar, we banned it in the US. So long ago, most people watching this probably don't even know what DDT is. But see, that was a different time where we took action. Or maybe it was just a time where DDT didn't have the right kinds of lobbyists and didn't have enough money behind them.
Corporate lobbyists are spending millions.
See, there's a specific plastic that was really raising the alarm a few years ago. It was called bisphenol A, or BPA, as most people know it.
This one says BPA free.
What's BPA?
I don't know.
One of the most well-known endocrine disrupting chemicals. I'm sure you've got a few cups or shakers in your cupboards with a nice little BPA-free sticker on it. Isn't that nice? How comforting to know that there's no BPA in there. And the things that replace them definitely didn't come with the same issues, right?
But regulators and industry, they read Dr. Belcher's research and they were like, OMG, we didn't know. We'll replace BPA with something. Maybe instead we'll use BPS. And that fixed it, right?
Things like bisphenol S and all of these, based on their chemical structure, they behave almost exactly like, and sometimes more so for the endocrine disruptor effects, just like BPA.
See, BPA was originally meant to be used as a pharmaceutical hormone that mimics estrogen in our bodies, until it got repurposed as a plastic in the 1950s. Again, they knew that it functioned like a hormone in our bodies, but still put it into circulation for consumers. It went essentially unchecked until it fell under heavy scrutiny in the 70s, which ironically was actually when DDT got banned. But then it took 40 more years for BPA to actually be banned, thanks to lobbyists and meddling from different groups with a financial interest in its uses, like Stephen Henches, the main spokesman for the chemical industry. His name sounds suspiciously similar to henchman, by the way.
Dr. Stephen Henches is the main spokesman for the chemical industry.
In fact, both bisphenol A and phthalates have been subjected to numerous rigorous and comprehensive reviews by government agencies in the US and around the world. After more than 5 decades of use, no reliable evidence has shown bisphenol A or phthalates in consumer products to have caused any harm to any person.
He sounds so convincing, but consider this clip from the same interview.
I want you to focus on another fact that has been published in the peer-reviewed literature. Of the studies of bisphenol A that were funded by government sources, including the National Institute of Health, over 90% of them find adverse effects on animals. In contrast, none of the studies funded by industry report adverse effects. Now, some of you will recall the testimony in 1994 before Congress of the 7 heads of tobacco companies who swore that there was no link between cigarette smoking and cancer. As you listen to industry interpretation of the data on bisphenol A and phthalates, I would encourage you to think about that.
I'll link this down below, but the actual BPA timeline is a masterclass in fostering paranoia and government distrust from its citizens. The amount of people in and around the government pushing to maintain its legality is terrifying. Lack of regulation around a product does not mean that it is safe. It can simply mean that a company has enough money to tell the government and regulatory bodies to shut the fuck up long enough for them to make money.
So if the soundbite that we all pick up from this is that there's no risk to humans, I think we are making a certain error of logic, which is quite common, and it's been known, it's been first termed in 1600. It's called the appeal to ignorance fallacy. And that means there is no evidence against X, therefore X. And here, it's important to remember that an absence of evidence is not the same thing as evidence of absence.
In 2009, the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel found an email between the lead FDA bureaucrat for BPA, Dr. Michael Cheeseman, and the chemical industry lobbyist and architect of the BPA defense, Stephen Henches. Didn't we just hear from him?
No reliable evidence has shown bisphenol A or phthalates in consumer products to have caused any harm to any person.
Guess what the email was about, guys? He was asking Stephen, aka a bitch, for advice on how the FDA could debunk studies showing that BPA was causing miscarriages in workers who were exposed to it. There's no way to say this without sounding like a conspiracy theorist, but this is the truth. Companies factor in paying off politicians like this into their business plan as part of something that is just part of doing business. Oh my God, guys, am I gonna bring that up later? But there's one more bit to this. Remember I said DDT got banned pretty quick? It's understandable why they were hesitant. It had a lot of uses in fighting malaria. BPA, plastics, other EDCs, they're all taking a long time to get banned too. A study in 2022 found that even though another phthalate, DEHP, that is used in making some plastics soft, is illegal, but it is still in use in many medical supplies decades after the fact. Phthalates are still in most food packaging. Maybe we're slow to ban them because of their utility. Or maybe it's because all plastics are petrochemicals and the petrol industry is approaching $750 billion market value. What is throwing $1 million at a politician going to really do to their bottom line when they know that it can buy them a few more years in court arguing while our whole world continues to steep in the microplastics and EDCs that they're selling us? Possibly one of the most unbelievable things here is how plastic and EDCs are impacting the actual ratio of genders born. What we see in cities that have petrochemical plants in them is much higher levels of genital malformation, miscarriages, fertility issues. In a city called Amjanong, where one of these plants are, do we see the usual 50-50 split of male and female births? No. A statistically significant amount less males are born.
Amjanong is home to one of the great medical mysteries of our time. In 2006, the reservation became known internationally for having one of the sharpest declines in male births ever recorded. Instead of the normal 50-50 split, here, fewer than half as many boys are born as girls.
We looked at the births
in 5-year time periods and found that things were, relatively normal up until the early 1990s when we started to see this drop in the number of boys. And then from 1999 to 2003, there was a significant drop in the number of boys being born.
I think to a person in the community, we all knew there was some kind of impact from where we lived. But we didn't know that it had the significance that it had. It was just one of those things.
And for anybody who's going to make a joke about how that's a good thing and, oh, I'm on my way to go consume more microplastics now. You are so funny. You're so funny. You're very original. Oh my gosh. With these jokes, you're definitely not a carbon copy of all your friends. Now for the final elephant in the room. There are a few phrases that will pop up around plastic and phthalates. As I said, both of these are derived from petroleum, and there seems to be a feminizing component to these petroleum-based products. In several animals, most notably frogs and now humans, we're seeing phthalates correlated with feminization in males. Feminization, depending who you're talking to, can mean a few different things. Medically, it can mean adopting less masculine structural and hormonal characteristics, having a penis, having high testosterone levels, etc. Socially, it could mean maybe being less stoic. If you're a kinky little fella, it could mean something different that I'm not going to say here, and God be with you if you decide to go to Google or any specific websites. And of course, there's the gender identity idea, which seems to be changing depending who you ask. Surely there are loads of definitions in between each one of these, but Dr. Anthony Jay, who has a PhD in biochemistry from Boston University School of Medicine, briefly covers what it means in the way that we'll be using it here.
Cryptorchidism came up in our BPA conversation. It basically means your testes aren't descending properly. And then hypospadias, which is another genital defect. So right off the bat, we're seeing problems, testicular volume, lower testosterone, anal genital distance. That's feminization. So right off the bat, we're going to talk about feminization using actual scientific studies. Sometimes they don't use the word feminization because it's political. I'm not afraid to just use the word feminization. Let's call a spade a spade.
In this 2016 study, we also see what I suppose you could call gender atypical activities being present in children when exposed to phthalates through their mother's womb. As Dr. Shanna Swan covered earlier, the way we study phthalates in humans is complicated. And Dr. J echoes that here as well.
Like I just said, they're ubiquitous. So you can't take a person that doesn't have phthalates and compare them to a person who does have phthalates because we all are getting exposed to phthalates. So that's a huge problem in research. And it's also unethical to dose people with phthalates because, of course, they cause feminization.
Yet in this study, we see that higher levels of phthalates were correlated with a weak but still significant finding of, as they put it, higher odds of membership in the least typical behavior group for males only, meaning they were seeing males presenting more feminine characteristics. And while it might be tempting to brush this research off as dated, remember that this was done in 2016 before this research became so politicized. And it was done using the Gender Identity Questionnaire, or GIQ, and the Playmate and Playstyle Preferences Structured Interview, or PPPSI, which are both part of diagnosing gender identity disorder, and it was over an 8-year period. Just to be clear, a kid playing with certain kinds of toys or acting in a certain way or of a certain temperament doesn't concretely mean anything in isolation. I played with Barbies with my sister as a kid. She played cars with me as a kid. I am still a man. She is still a woman. That said, we also saw similar outcomes in a 2023 study where inverted masculinity and femininity scores were shown in boys and girls. But let's give you one more strong source from Dr. Shanna Swan.
The other study that you're referring to, I think, is the play behavior. And this is even more controversial because it's based on the assumption that the behavior of children in play and in their daily activities is sexually dimorphic. Well, first of all, they did this with monkeys, and they showed that the monkeys made the same choices as human children, that a male monkey will go for the car and the female monkey won't. And in our study, when we asked the mother about the play behavior of the child and ranked their answers as male and female, the male typical behavior was less male typical in boys who were exposed to phthalates.
Phthalates are nuts. They are everywhere. Right now, there are over 30 different phthalates that have been identified and studied, but that total number is likely significantly higher. And of that number, more than 10 are still common in commercial use. Now, while this evidence is not conclusive of a causal relationship, I do think that it merits a deeper look, and evidently, so do many scientists, because it has been getting more and more research funding with every year. This is a very complex topic that crosses anatomical, social, hormonal, and political borders. So if after hearing this, you are trying to draw any absolute conclusions about anything, I will encourage you not to. I will instead say that if this is interesting to you or seems relevant to you in any way, to look into phthalate and plastic reduction in your life and see what, if any, changes present. And a reminder that many of these physical changes these plastics and EDCs cause during infant years and childhood appear to unfortunately be permanent in some cases. All we can really do is move forward with the information we have now and minimize exposure for ourselves, our cities, and future generations, knowing that we may directly benefit from none of it. So finally, what do we do? How long is it actually going to take to get out of our systems?
Now, at this point, it should be obvious that all of us are completely riddled with this shit, and future generations, if they even exist, will look back on us with disgust at how the hell we let our plastic problem get so out of hand that it ended up in our balls.
If I wanted to be reductionistic, I would just say, oh, let's do what the demographic with the highest fertility rate is doing. I'm talking 7 kids on average per family. But most people probably don't want to make the switch to being Amish. Seriously though, according to this 2021 study, it looks like the only thing that is stopping them from having even more kids is the restriction of their city sizes, but I digress. A lot of these exposures are unavoidable. There is nothing that you can do to make your hospital stop using plastic. You can't change how they package your food. You can't get every single commercial farm to get with the program and stop feeding cattle and soil pieces of plastic. You cannot avoid plastics and EDCs if you go to the most remote parts of the world and make your homestead with a nice little white picket fence and a well that you drilled yourself with a beautiful blonde-haired wife and 2.5 kids. No, our only option is to reduce exposure where you can. So this is my personal list if you'd like to do the same. The main goal with a lot of these things is to make this change one time and be able to reap those rewards forever. So I will start with those. Switching to natural organic clothing, ideally ones that are also GOTS certified like NADS, so they aren't grown in pesticides or in soils that are full of EDCs and plastics. NADS was my first choice because, I mean, they're my balls, guys. They're really important to me. I love my balls! You know, I want there to be less plastic and EDCs in them. Don't forget to use code HolisticMotion for 15% off your first order from nadsunder.com, by the way. No plastic cutting boards or plastic prep containers. This is a pretty easy one. You know, you can find glass or wooden ones, ideally with a glass lid, but remember, it's not about perfection. If you can just make them a little bit better, that's still good. Perfection is the enemy of good. It's about less exposure and slightly better. Getting cast iron cookware. I got tricked by the non-toxic ceramic cookware. I know this sucks, but a lot of cookware out there will say it's non-toxic, and it's not necessarily the case with a lot of them. But cast iron is pretty hard to screw up, luckily. Next, dusting, vacuuming, and sweeping your home regularly. It seems insignificant until you actually see how much you're cleaning up every single day. Researching this article has actually made my house significantly cleaner because I'm a little paranoid about it now. Trying to limit products with heavy perfumes in them, like detergents or soaps or lotions, because of the plastic and the EDCs that are in them. Sometimes you can find options from metal containers. Those are quite a bit better of an option, even though there is still that plastic liner. But again, it's about reduction, guys. And I know this sounds insane, but as far as washing your clothes, white wine vinegar is actually a great option for that. It doesn't make you smell like vinegar. I've been using it for like a month and a half now, and it has made my clothes extremely soft. Not drinking out of plastic bottles. That one probably is obvious.
Especially, like, what if this bottle of water is coming from another country and it's on a boat across the fucking ocean the entire time, just cooking?
You leave your bottle in your car in the sun, you know, and then you come back and drink it.
Yeah, that stuff is just cooking.
Yeah.
It's cooking. And it's turning us into some weird thing where our dicks are shrinking.
Home filters kind of work, you know, the little like jugs, but most of those are freaking like Brita filters that are plastic. And those whole home filters are usually too expensive for most people. Reverse osmosis is probably one of the best ones as long as you remember to remineralize all your water. Dr. Shanna Swan prefers to use a tabletop distiller. Spring water might be an even better option as it's essentially using the entire earth as a filter. In theory, that water should be untouched by plastic and EDCs, but you can get water test kits if you'd like to confirm that. I personally go to findaspring.com. I drive up into the mountains with a few 5-gallon carboys, and then I fill those up once a month. I don't know if you can see that behind me, but there's a big 5-gallon glass jug. You can usually find those 5-gallon carboys on Facebook Marketplace for like 20 bucks from some dude who thought he was gonna start brewing his own beer during the pandemic. No more paper utensils like cups or straws. Many of them have that plastic lining or toxic sealant in them. Getting an air purifier for your home. I don't have one of these yet personally, but I will eventually. Trying to find a regenerative farm or a farmer's market in your area to get your food from. Sometimes it's actually cheaper than the grocery store if you buy in bulk. I know that sounds insane, but you'd be shocked what you can find. So that's how we're minimizing exposure. How do we actually get them out of our system? Sweat. Go to the gym. Get in the sauna. We can see phthalates and BPA in human sweats. This is not medical advice, but you can also try adding niacin to your sauna session. This is what they did to help soldiers suffering from Gulf War illness to detox when they were just exposed to tons and tons of different things. Here's why I think you should start making these changes today. Microplastics and EDCs appear to not just be inherited, but they seem to be impacting people for many generations. In a famous study called Pottinger's Cats by Francis M. Pottinger, he created a food and lifestyle environment for cats that over 3 generations caused them to become progressively more and more degenerate, less agile, less coordinated, impaired growth, increased birth defects, poorly formed skulls, more disease, aggressive female cats, and docile male cats. That kind of sounds like a hormonal issue to me, guys. Difficult pregnancies, increased miscarriages, fertility issues. Sounds kind of familiar. The theory about why this was happening is what is called a germplasm injury. In other words, damage to the germ cells, which are the reproductive cells, sperm and ova, responsible for passing genetic information to the next generation. Meaning just by the parents having it, it was impacting the quality of the sperm and ova of the next generation. This is what plastics and EDCs appear to be doing. It took, on average, 3 generations to heal these cats by giving them a healthier lifestyle and diet. The average age to have a child as a human right now is about 30. So 3 generations, that's about 100 years. The first fully synthetic plastic was made in 1907, 100 years ago. We are that 3rd generation. Some of the people watching are that 4th generation. If we don't begin now, it's not clear how many generations we will have left, barring extreme fertility interventions. The sad thing is that we are in a hell of our own making. Plastic single-use trash to feed our consumerist excess. Many of these switches we can make are possible, and we can pressure companies into making better options for you. You always vote with your dollar, but for many of the choices that we can switch to, they're finite in their own way. The sand that we use to make glass, believe it or not, is a finite material. There are literal sand mafias in the Middle East that people are getting beheaded by. So unless we're going to shoulder the massive inconvenience of returning, repurposing, or cleaning all the glassware that we get, which is really not that hard, our time with glass will quickly come to an end and we will once again have an ass full of plastic. Oh God, that sounds terrible out of context. We have quick-to-go containers, the contacts in our eyes, the cheap Temu, Shein, and Alibaba clothing that we use to signal beauty and youth to strangers. We have everything that we could ever ask for and more. The monkey's paw has had yet another finger curl down into this dystopian, apocalyptic hellscape that we have found ourselves in. According to the US Fish and Wildlife Service, humans already meet several of the criteria to be marked as an endangered species. And we have no one to blame but the companies who have lied to us for centuries and ourselves for trusting them. Thank you for sticking around to the end, guys. And as one final word, don't forget that we were told time and time again that this doesn't matter, that there is no need to worry about any of this.
And remember, kids, the next time that somebody tells you the government wouldn't do that, oh yes they would.
So until next time, guys, my name's Andrew with Holistic Motion. See you later.
SAPEA stated in their verdict, which is the word they use on their website, that there's no widespread risk to humans and the environment. And as Dick said, the WHO wrote that humans have ingested microplastics and other particles in the environment for decades, with no related indication of adverse health effects, or there is no evidence to indicate a human health concern. So if the soundbite that we all pick up from this is that there's no risk to humans, I think we are making a certain error of logic, which is quite common, and it's been first termed in 1600. It's called the appeal to ignorance fallacy. And that means there is no evidence against X, therefore X. And here, it's important to remember that an absence of evidence is not the same thing as evidence of absence. And I think that's a problem, and Bertrand Russell, the philosopher, agrees with me. He wrote a long time ago that such logical errors are of greater practical importance than many people believe. They enable their perpetrators to hold the comfortable opinion on every subject in turn. This is not the time for holding comfortable opinions that there's, for example, no risk.
If you like that video, guys, make sure to click the one up top to learn how they are lying to you about fasting, or click this bottom video to see what I've been up to lately. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. So until next time, guys, see you later.